Ethics Untangled is made by the Idea Centre at the University of Leeds. It's a podcast about the difficult ethical questions we face in everyday life. In each episode, I interview someone, usually a philosopher, who's spent time thinking through one of these questions, and we try between us to work out what's going on. Ruby Hornsby is a PhD student at the Idea Centre. Her thesis is about artificial friends, robots, and their interactions with humans, and whether these interactions can be part of a good human life. We had an enjoyable and wide-ranging conversation, which made me think differently about friendship. What do we get out of friendship, and how much of that is possible when the supposed friend we're talking about is not a person with an inner life of their own, but an artificial being that's been programmed to act in a friendly way towards us? I was also really interested in Ruby's ideas about fiction, and the way our interactions with robots might be a bit like our interactions with fictional characters. I hope you find the conversation as interesting as I did. I'm here with Ruby Hornsby. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi Jim, thank you for having me here today.
No problem, it's great to see you. So the topic of this podcast is going to be on the question, can robots and humans be friends? So I suppose to start things off, I was wondering if you could just give us a few examples of where this question comes up, because some people might be thinking, well, this is just a science fiction question, right? It's not something that really comes up in real life, but actually there are some cases of robots that look like they have friendship-type relationships with people, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is an area of research that's getting a lot of investment at the minute, and I think you're right, up until recent years it was kind of in the realm of science fiction. But actually in a recent YouGov survey that I looked at, I think it was back in 2018 actually, 1 in 5 people in the UK think they can imagine themselves being friends with robots in the near future. So it's definitely something that's kind of gaining momentum, this idea that we can be friends with robots. And also, you know, these robots are getting more and more advanced. I mean, some of you might have seen in the news recently that there was a humanoid robot called Ada. He was the first robot to give evidence in the House of Lords. Well, it attempted to actually shut down. But yeah, that shows something. There's also kind of not just humanoid robots, but robots that are modelled on kind of animals. For example, Abo is a dog robot that will run and fetch a ball and greet you when you come through the front door, and you know, loves to play with you allegedly. And you've also got kind of another type of social robot which is gaining popularity, and that's a sex robot. And you know, you can buy one of these for kind of $6,000 on the market today. And it seems like some people definitely are starting to consider the idea that maybe these robots, be they animal-like, human-like, or in a sexual context, but also serve as friends.
Yeah, okay, great. So in order to answer that question, I guess we first need to think about what friendship is, and the kind of ideas about friendship that you're exploring in your work are attributable, first of all, to Aristotle. So Aristotle put forward some conditions that have to be in place for a friendship to exist. Is that right?
So Aristotle argues that friendship is a kind of disposition to share time and engage in activity with another agent. And as you mentioned, there are 2 kind of conditions that have to be met in order for this to be a real example of friendship. So the first thing that Aristotle says must be the case. In order for 2 things to be friends with one another, it must be the case that they have mutual love for one another. So I have to love my friend, but also, importantly, my friend has to love me back. And it's really easy to kind of use this word love and just kind of accept it as this vague, abstract concept. But in philosophy, that's kind of not good enough. So what Aristotle argues is love in this context, in the context of a friendship, involves 2 really important elements. The first is desire. So we desire our friend, meaning, you know, I might think, I desire that great property of my friend, be it a really good sense of humour, or they're just really pleasant to be around, or, you know, maybe they've got a really kind heart, these kind of good attributes about them. And also, we want to act in our friends' best interests, so we want to have goodwill for our friends.
Does that really mark out a friendship relationship from any other kind of relationship, though? Because I can imagine, a work colleague, you might sort of think they've got really good qualities and you want to sort of avail yourself of those qualities in some sense, and you might wish the best for them, but you wouldn't think they were a friend.
So I think Aristotle actually argues that you would consider them a friend as long as they had that kind of attitude towards you as well, as long as they also desired you and had goodwill for you. He uses friendship in a really, really broad way. So it's not just, your best friend. It's not just, who you might go on a night out with. But it's also just maybe work colleagues, like the example you used, or people that you kind of know, where you kind of get these loving, friendly feelings towards them. Yeah,
okay, good. And the question we're trying to answer is whether that can exist between humans and robots. So I take it the question then is, well, first of all, can humans have that kind of friendly love towards robots, i.e., can they desire the good qualities of robots and also want the best for robots, so kind of want what's in the interests of the robots? And on the other hand, can robots have friendly love for humans? Can they desire the good qualities of humans and want what's best for humans as well? So to take the first of those questions, can humans have friendly love for robots in that kind of sense? I mean, so I suppose, given some of the examples that you've discussed, we could say that you could desire certain qualities of those robots, whether that's kind of sexual or, companionable or whatever, that they have qualities which you would want to sort of be involved with. But can you wish them well? I mean, that seems a bit strange to say that you could actually wish a robot well.
Yeah, sure. So I think you're right. I share that intuition that we can definitely kind of desire these robots. That seems pretty unproblematic to me. But the question that's quite difficult to answer, as you've highlighted, is can we really wish something well that's lifeless? And the example Aristotle talks about is, we can't have goodwill towards a glass of wine. If we're wishing that wine well, we're just wishing it well insofar as we want to have a nice glass of wine. We're not doing anything for the wine's sake. But what I think is kind of different about these robots is that, they do appear like they have kind of lifelike qualities and attributes. So unlike the wine, where we might struggle to think it's really possible to act in the interests of the wine, certain people might think, actually, maybe these robots do have interests, or maybe we can pretend that they have interests. And I think that's maybe enough to wish them well in that context.
Okay, so you have a robot that you're interacting with, and you just kind of feel that you want things to go well for that robot. And I suppose there are ways in which things can sort of go badly for robots, right? They can run out of battery, or kind of their joints can seize up and things. And if you kind of want that not to happen, there's a sense in which you're wishing that robot well. Yeah,
definitely. And I mean, I know some people might kind of be sat thinking, oh, hang on a minute, you're not really wishing them well. You're doing what you did in the case of the wine. You're just thinking, I want this robot to maybe function properly so that for my own interests. But actually, I think, some people at least will have this kind of genuine sense that they do want what's in the interests of the robot. And I mean, just by way of comparison, there's a sexuality called objectum sexuality. And this is, where people are kind of attracted to inanimate objects and love them and care for them. And what's distinctive about the sexuality is not that they're, just having this one-way bond with an inanimate entity, be it a bridge, a chandelier, or famously kind of the Eiffel Tower. Right. But also what's characteristic is the fact that these objectum sexuals believe that these inanimate entities are loving them back. There's like a relationship of reciprocity here. So if we can have that with some inanimate entities at least, and I acknowledge that this is a very rare sexuality, yes, but why can't we have that towards robots that are far more convincing in the fact that they have lifelike qualities?
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. When you're describing this kind of wishing the robot well, it feels like it's a kind of emotional state, right? It's not just a desire in the sense that you might think, yes, I want that to happen. It's a kind of, you might feel sad if something appears to go wrong for the robot, and it makes you feel happy if something goes right for the robot, right? So there's a kind of emotional engagement that you're talking about here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not just kind of stating the fact that you want what's in its best interest and telling the robot that that's the case, but almost, like a yearning for it really to come about, that the robot becomes happy or succeeds in its adventures, or whatever.
Yeah, and there's a sense in which your emotional state becomes entangled with the robot in some way, so that if things go well for the robot, you feel that things kind of go well for you, or at least it's kind of part of what you want for the robot. Yeah,
definitely. And I mean, that's just the case with ordinary friendships. So, when I say ordinary, I mean human to human friendships. It becomes an emotional feature of your relationship. And I think that can definitely extend to human-robot relationships, yeah.
Okay, so it seems like there's at least a sense in which people can desire what's best for robots, and it seems fairly uncontroversial to say that they can themselves desire the good features of those robots. But can robots reciprocate that? That seems much more problematic, right? Do we think that robots can have friendly love for humans? So, I mean, first of all, can robots wish other people well?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really tricky question, and I'm not going to promise to have the answers here. I think one thing is really important to distinguish between, and that's things really loving, desiring or wishing other things well, and things being designed to appear like they are. So we certainly know that robots can appear to wish us well and act in our interests. Maybe we ask the robot to get us a glass of water and it does it straight away. Surely that seems like it's acting in light of what we want it to do, and it's got our best interests at heart there. But how on earth can we even start thinking about whether it's really the case that the robot is wishing us well and has goodwill for us? So, I mean, what I do in my research, and this is still really in the early stages, but seeing as kind of well-wishing is this mental state, and same with desire, I kind of generalize and I say, well, if we're going to say that robots are loving us, we're going to say that they're desiring us and they've got goodwill for us, we're going to have to generalize here and say, do robots have minds, essentially? And I mean, that's a really tricky question to answer. The short answer for me is no.
Right, okay, so at least with robots as they currently exist, I think it's fairly uncontroversial that they don't actually have minds. But is it possible that robots could develop to the extent that they behave as if they wish us well and want what's in our interests in quite a sophisticated way? So at least, the appearance is there that they want what's best for us.
Yeah, definitely. And I think actually we're already kind of getting to that point. I mean, these technologies, they're not that sophisticated yet. If you type into YouTube, and you can watch these robots kind of trying to speak like a human and, trying to move, but they're quite disjointed. But already there are people that kind of do believe that these robots are loving them sincerely. So I don't know if we even need to talk about, a time when this technology is going to become advanced enough to convince us, because I think for some people, certainly, it's already there. But regardless of that, regardless of whether we think this technology is loving us, I mean, I'm very, very hesitant to say that it is.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable, yeah. Okay, so that sounds right. If we think robots don't have a mind, don't have subjectivity, there is a sense in which it just doesn't make sense to say that they can actually wish as well. They can desire what's best for us. Certainly not in the kind of emotionally engaged sense that we were discussing earlier when talking about the, love that humans might be able to have for robots. And it's probably, as we've already said, the sense in which robots can have interests and we can actually desire what's in the interests of robots is a kind of, it's not quite the same sense that we would desire what's in the interests of a human being, right? So we can kind of feel that we desire what would be good for the robot, but they don't quite have interests in quite the same way as human beings have. So we might sort of respond to them as if they do, but it's not quite the same sense, right?
Well, I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I think for the majority of people that's definitely the case, but there are certain situations where it seems like humans are capable of really thinking that that these robots do have their own interests and we can act in light of them. So there's a landmine diffusing robot, for example, designed by a guy called Mark Tilden. And this robot is essentially, it's a machine with lots of big, long legs, and it goes around and it steps on a landmine with one of its legs. And when it does that, the leg gets blown off and it continues to pull itself round on its remaining legs until all the legs have gone, with the goal being that, the landmines are all going to be exploded and it's safe. And actually, an army officer was invited to witness this happening and ordered immediately that the experiment was stopped because he regarded the experiment as being inhumane. Right. And it seems like in that situation, actually, the army officer isn't thinking, does this robot have interests or not? It's, they were thinking, actually, this is bad and this needs to stop right now, in the same way that we might if the landmine robot was an animal or a fellow human being. The officer was acting in the robot's interests.
That's really interesting, isn't it? And the idea that, what is essentially an inanimate object, your treatment of that can be inhumane. It's as if what that army officer's pointing to there is something to do with the kind of character or virtue of the people who are treating the robot in that way, right? It's not that what they're saying rests on the object having interest that you're acting against. It's just like, it's a cruel way to behave towards something which appears to, exhibit certain kind of human or at least animal-like qualities.
I think it could be that. It could be, let's stop this experiment because it's bad for the witnesses of the experiment and it's bad it seems cruel to, for example, enjoy something where something's getting destroyed. But also I do think it's possible that maybe the officer did genuinely, momentarily kind of suspend their disbelief about the fact that this entity was a machine. And in that moment became immersed in the idea that actually this robot has its own interests. It's getting its artificial legs blown off. Let's terminate the experiment. I mean, I'm not sure if that's what the officer was thinking, but it seems likely that it could be the case. Yeah.
And in any case, what strikes me is that, when you're describing that case, but also, cases of, for example, people with dementia who are given these social robots that they form kind of emotional bonds with, there's something going on there, right? So they are having some kind of friendship-like relationship with that robot. And you wouldn't want to just say straightforwardly, they're just wrong about it, they're just deceived, because clearly they're getting something out of it, right? And so we ought to try and explain what that is.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think a couple of things to note. The first is that, you used the example of elderly patients with dementia who might be more susceptible to ascribing kind of loving states towards robots and feeling like they're reciprocated, for example. But actually, it's not just elderly patients with dementia or, really young children, as often is cited in the literature, but also, roboticists, for example. The example of Cynthia Brazil, you might be familiar with. She designed a social robot called Kismet, and she developed really strong feelings of attachment and love towards this robot, despite being one of the key designers on how the robot operated. And when it came to the end of her PhD, she experienced a lot of grief, actually, about leaving the robot. But also, definitely, I think there is, to what you were saying about the idea that there's some sort of sense in which these relationships are real, despite the fact that the robots aren't loving the person back. And I think an interesting way to think about that is maybe in how we engage with fiction generally. So, for example, we might think when we're reading a book that we develop feelings of attachment to a certain fictional character in that book. And maybe we even think that that character understands us or cares about us or gets us in ways that maybe our friends don't. Or to use a physical example, you can think of children with their teddy bears. They might think, yeah, I'm taking this bear on holiday for my sake, but also maybe they're taking the bear on holiday because they think that the bear's going to have a really good time here. So there is definitely a sense in which there's something somewhat real about this relationship, but it's real in the sense that it's based on an immersive experience that's not representative of real love, but it's representative of kind of how we engage with fiction more generally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you used the phrase willing suspension of disbelief before, right? So that seems to kind of get towards what we might think's going on. Yeah, it was interesting you were talking about children with dolls. So I had an experience with my 4-year-old daughter recently where she was she's got a doll called Grimble, and She kind of engages in lots of imaginative play with Grimble and sort of puts Grimble to bed and reads Grimble stories and all this kind of stuff. But at one point she did just say, like, Grimble's not real. I was kind of joining in, and she said, she's not real. And I was like, no, I know. So, like, on one level, she perfectly understands that this is not a living creature, right? But she absolutely acts as if she is, on a day-to-day basis, and gets loads out of doing that.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, that's a great example of somebody that might be aware that they're engaging in a make-believe situation. So your daughter's aware that, Grimble's not alive overall, but she's willing to kind of, for the sake of fun or entertainment, pretend that Grimble's a real thing that's really going to enjoy being around her and being around you guys. Yeah. And that might be the case for some people when they're engaging with robots, maybe even the majority of people, that they're, aware that they're playing make-believe, essentially. Yeah. But for others, maybe they're actually convinced. They don't recognise that they're in a game. They believe that they're entertaining something that's real, despite the fact, I'd argue, it's not.
You're acting as if it's real, aren't you? When we engage with a work of fiction, it's not as simple as saying it's not just hypothetical. We don't just kind of say, what if this thing was real? When we're actually reading the book or watching the play or the film or whatever it is, we're engaging with those characters in a way that's at least analogous to how we would engage with real people. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's willing suspension of disbelief, right? But we do, on one level, know that it is a work of fiction, that it's not real, but we're suspending that disbelief in order to engage with it in a way that's rewarding for us. And that might be what's happening with the social robots as well.
Yeah, and I mean, in spite of the fact we're suspending our disbelief in these cases, it's also cool to kind of think about how our emotional responses to these cases are really still quite powerful. When we do read a scary book, we know ultimately that it's kind of fake, and the scary monster in the book's not really going to come into your room and get you. But we still might have a pounding heart, and we might sweat, and we might have nightmares. So I don't think the fact that it's a fictional, immersive relationship, I don't think that trivializes it at all. But yeah, ultimately, some people are able to overcome those symptoms by realizing that they're just playing a game at the end of the day. Yeah.
I wondered if another parallel that might be a bit instructive is the way some people interact with their pets. So, people have dogs, and people really, in my experience, really vary in the extent to which they treat those dogs as if they are another person, right? So some of them, it's just an animal, and it lives in the house, and you feed it, and you go for walks with it, and you have fun, and that's it. for some people, it is almost like another human being, and they kind of treat it as if it's a friend of theirs, right? And they treat it as if the kind of complexity of the dog's feelings towards them is on the same level as the feelings that they have towards the dog. Now, I don't know, in some of those cases, they probably just literally believe that that's what's happening, right? In other cases, it might be a bit more like the doll, that on one level they know that a dog isn't quite capable of the same sort of degree of cognitive complexity as humans are, but they just get a lot out of treating it as if it is. And maybe something similar is going on.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really cool example, like looking at animal-human relationships as a parallel. And I mean, I've got 2 dogs and 2 cats at home. And, you know, my mum is really guilty of treating the dogs like human beings. I mean, it was Halloween recently and they had jumpers with pumpkins on, for example, which is super cute. But also, you know, how you were saying, my mum's able to recognise that the dogs don't love her in the same way, because when we're eating dinner at the dinner table, the dogs get shut out the room, right? They're not kind of like sitting on a seat with us. When push comes to shove, they are the dog.
Yeah.
But I think the difference between the way that we might think about relationships with animals is that animals are, first of all, they do have life. They have life-like qualities because they're living beings. They're sentient. And also they do have, pardon the kind of metaphorical use of language, but they do have minds of their own. We might think that there are certain things that animals have that robots don't, such as the ability to think for themselves, arguably. Because animals are living creatures, maybe the way they respond to us is more valuable. Unlike robots, they're not programmed to come up to us and give us a cuddle and love us. They're kind of choosing to do that, and if they don't want to, they don't have to. So to some extent, maybe humans and animals really can be friends with one another.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I suppose there might be a sort of continuum there. I mean, because I guess in some cases these robots really are just programmed to respond in quite mechanistic ways. In others, right, they're going to be learning to respond to humans, and maybe they'll be programmed in a very general way to sort of pick up on what that human's enjoying and kind of respond to that. But they're going to do things, for example, that might surprise the person.
Yeah, I mean, this is quite a tricky discussion of when we're talking about whether robots have minds, because like you've just said, certain robots, it's obvious they don't. They're programmed, to perform a task, and we understand that the robot's just following a set of rules. But with other robots that are more sophisticated, that are learning how to behave over time, to date, we're using kind of this machine learning processes, and the exact rules and patterns that they're spotting in order to learn how to give out a certain output, we don't actually have any way of knowing what those exact rules and processes are that they're following. We're just giving it, lots of data, telling it to maybe you're doing a good job when the human's smiling and a bad job when the human's sad, and get on with it. But we don't actually know how it is that it's learning exactly to conduct tasks in a way that will facilitate the output.
Okay, yeah. Okay, good. So to go back to the idea of fiction then, I think it sounds right to say that in a lot of cases, what's happening is that the human is engaging with the robot as if it's a friend, in the same way that we would engage with a work of fiction as if it's describing reality. But the question that raises in my mind is, well, what's the value of that then? So why do we think that friendship is valuable, and how much of that value can we get from a fictional version of friendship as opposed to a friendship with another human being?
Yeah, so I think the fact that friendship, this kind of human-robot relationship, might be based on fiction and might be based on a game, essentially. necessarily devalues it, because for some people that could be extremely valuable. Having a simulation of friendship is something that could be absolutely amazing, for the right person who's potentially very lonely, or can't maybe get out the house to see lots of people, or maybe they've got certain physical disabilities that prevent them from getting out and making lots of friends in the community. And for certain groups of people, this technology could be absolutely brilliant. But where I'm kind of quite concerned is the idea that actually, it's a lot easier to just kind of put robots into people's homes and say, get on with it, you don't need human-to-human contact, or maybe it's cheaper, maybe we've not got enough resources. I think that kind of using it as a solution to end loneliness and to relieve isolation, feelings of isolation, is quite a tragic thing, really. There's something, I don't know if this is just me, but I think there's something really valuable about having contact with other human beings. And I'm worried that, this kind of relationship with robots could excuse us from our obligations to fulfill other people's needs with real humans.
Right, yeah. So I suppose some of the things we get from friendships are just quite practical, right? And other things are more emotional. And it seems like in the robot case, the practical stuff, well, you're probably going to be able to get some of that. Maybe as these things get more advanced, actually, the extent to which you can get the sort of practical benefits might increase. And on the emotional side, well, it does seem like we get some kind of, rich emotional interaction with these robots, or at least we can. But it's a simulation. It still is a simulation rather than the real thing. And so, part of what Aristotle said, to go back to Aristotle, is that, for a friendship to exist, each party needs to want what's best for the other. And I suppose one thing we get from friendships is just the feeling that somebody else wants what's best for us, right? And if we're trying to get that from a robot, well, we might sort of get the fictional version of that, which is to say we can pretend that this other entity wants what's best for us, but on one level we know it doesn't really, and that there is something important missing there, right? Yeah,
and it's funny because this question often comes up in conferences and things like that, and people are saying, well, like if these robots are able to perform, practical tasks like you said, or even, engage in a simulation of sex, or even, some robots are being trialed as therapists, so they've got that kind of emotional outlet as well. Then, what's so bad about all of this? Why can't we just accept that, okay, it's a simulation, the robot doesn't really love you back? Is that a problem? And I think, again, for some people it need not be a problem. It could be absolutely a brilliant piece of technology, but I do think there's a lot of scope for exploitation. If humans are becoming really close to a robot and disclosing their secrets to these robots, should these robots have safeguarding concerns kind of like built into them so that it immediately flags it to the relevant person? Or, are these robots exempt from certain duties of care? It becomes more complex. I think it's easy to be quite positive about these relationships and think, lots of people are going to benefit, but I'm quite skeptical, and I think a lot of work needs to be done to ensure that this technology is used for the best, and that actually there aren't any hiccups along the way that could, or things that could be potentially catastrophic, actually, in terms of violating people's privacy.
Because when we enter into a friendship-like relationship with someone else or with something else, we're making ourselves vulnerable, right?
Yeah. Making ourselves vulnerable, opening ourselves up, and we want to ensure that a robot is going to be the proper recipient of that honesty.
So another thing that I'm interested in is the ethics of sort of deception and potentially self-deception in these relationships. So if we think that people, when entering into relationships with robots, are doing so on a sort of fictional basis, Some of those people might be perfectly clear that this is a fiction. Others, particularly those who are vulnerable, I suppose, might be more kind of deceived about the basis of that relationship. And do you think there's a potential for exploitation there, especially when, for example, in the way that companies market these robots, and they might make misleading claims about what the actual basis of the relationship with the robot will be?
Yeah, so to go back to the robot that I was talking about this at the start, I briefly mentioned that there's a robot called Abo, for example, and this robot looks like a dog, and it's very lovable in that sense. It's cute and it's friendly, and it seems like it's going to be a great companion to have in the house. But Sony actually claimed that this robot is able to enter a two-way relationship of feelings with its user. The robot is able to love its user, and I think that things like that are incredibly problematic because it's just a general lack of transparency and exploiting the fact that people are quite easily manipulated by this technology.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think that's all we've got time for. So, Ruby Hornsby, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me on here. It's been brilliant.
If you enjoyed this episode of Ethics Untangled, please like and subscribe and recommend us to your friends. The podcast is edited by Mark Smith at Leeds Media Services, and our music is by Kate Wood. Ethics Untangled is brought to you by the Idea Centre, a specialist unit for teaching, research, training and consultancy in applied ethics at the University of Leeds. We offer master's programmes in healthcare ethics and applied and professional ethics, and PhDs available full or part-time and face-to-face or by online learning. We also offer consultancy and training services for business and the professions, including help with the difficult ethical issues faced by your organisation, commissioned research projects, and online or face-to-face CPD. If you'd like to find out more about these or any of our other activities, please visit our website at ahc.leeds.ac.uk/ethics.